What is up, everybody? Welcome to The Stack. I'm Alex.
I'm Justin.
And we are talking about a bunch of different comics here. I do want to mention, for anybody who is watching us on YouTube, we're trying out the little visual stuff. This was a request from a viewer on YouTube to put up the comic book covers. If you're listening to the audio podcast version, this doesn't matter to you. But if you want to check us out at youtube.com/comicbookclub, we're going to try this out, see what happens. Maybe it'll be a disaster.
It's cool.
I don't know.
I think it's cool.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, we are going to kick it off. Cool. Are we? We are going to be talking about Exceptional X-Men #1 from Marvel, written by Ewing, art by Carmen Carnero. This is the latest From the Ashes title, and the idea here is that Kitty Pryde has moved to Chicago. She doesn't want anything to do with mutants anymore. And, Emma Frost is front and center on the cover. That doesn't matter that much because it's basically a character study of Kitty Pryde. I will say up front, I wasn't sure I was going to like this one, even though I like the young mutant concept in general. I thought this was great.
Agree. This gets into, I think some of the stuff we've been talking about with the new X-Men line, I guess we can say, is that it feels sort of premise first, and then the characters are finding their way into the story, and it's sort of moving at not exactly a pace we would predict. Like, it's taking a minute. And I think, with the exception being Uncanny X-Men, and I would put this in that pile, this is following a character, Kitty Pryde, who seems like not the most happy, but this book is the most like Peter Parker as Spider-Man, but Kitty Pryde from the X-Men, that I've seen maybe ever in X-Men history.
I thought the characterization was really fascinating. Like, there's a little bit of, this isn't exactly right, but there's a little bit of like a to the camera Fleabag thing going on here, particularly with how,
which is cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. It makes me feel like there's a little something more going on because she's directly addressing us, the reader. So maybe there's some sort of twist there, but I love the focus of this issue. This is basically Kitty bummed because she spent her entire life fighting for mutant kind and fighting for the X-Men, and it amounted to nothing. And I will say, as a person who was recently laid off from my job, I found a lot to see in that, in terms of like, you're going through your whole life, you get to your 30s and you're like, what have I been doing now? What all this stuff I believed in? Come on. And I think that's what they're channeling here. Like, Uncanny X-Men, really enjoying that title so far from Gail Simone. That's your iconic classic team book. NYX is a little bit of the like 20s in New York book, but this is okay, I've been through my 20s in New York. Now I'm back home in my 30s tending bar. What am I doing here? And such a great character study of that. The contrast with the New Mutant, who really idolizes Kitty Pryde, I thought was really well done. And I'll also shout out the action stuff. Like, there's a chase through a concert using Kitty's powers that is very fun.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, and like a big thing I want to say here is it's treating her as like a whole person. And that's something I think we don't get a ton of in comics in general, specifically the X-Men. So I really like that aspect of it here. And the fact that she, it honestly, despite the fact that she's in her 30s and it's not exactly the youngest focus book, it feels fresh. And like fresher than NYX, which is like, we're the young version of this, of the X-Men. We're the young mutants. And this feels more young because I think there's just a deeper rooted character at the center. And I like this. I think it's going to jump around to some other characters, presumably the White Queen, which is why she is front and center. And I'm hyped for that. Like, I like, if we're just looking at the characters on this cover, like, I'm into it.
Yeah, very into this as well. Why don't we move to another big one, which is Star Trek 500 from IDW, written by Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt, Jody Houser, Stephanie Williams, Mike Chen, Magdalene Visaggio, Morgan Hampton, Jackson Lanzing, Colin Kelly, and Christopher Cantwell. Art by Leonard Kirk, Vernon Smith, Tench, Angel Hernandez, Megan Huang, Megan Levens, and Davide Tinto. This is what you'd expect, which is a tribute to Star Trek throughout the eras, starting with Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt with Leonard Kirk on a Tribbles story, showing the perspective of the Tribble in that classic episode, and then going all the way through teasing what is coming up. And spoiler here, but I think it's already online. We're leading up to next year's event in the Star Trek universe, which is called Lore War. What'd you think about this one, Justin?
There's a lot of fun in here. I mean, the Tribble story, I thought, like, it's very much like, oh, wow, this is a real notch in Star Trek history, you could say. Like, you're getting the Tribble's perspective, and, they fuck.
They do. There you go. It's all about love. I like this. I thought these were good stories. I think these really nailed the eras. The Tribbles one was definitely sort of the big one, I think, like the big swing there. The rest of them are good. They're really solid. As a fan of Lower Decks, I'm wearing a Lower Decks shirt right now. I
was reading this and I was like, I don't watch Lower Decks, and I was like, Alex is loving this.
I did love that story. I thought it was a very good Lower Decks story. It was very fun and very funny, and I'm stoked for that event. Like, the idea of it,
the Lore War.
Yeah, Lore essentially creating his own mirror universe, it seems like, which is all focused around him being the god of that universe. That's cool. I'm into that. That seems fun.
I agree with you. And I thought it was a very much sort of scattershot, big moment for Star Trek. It felt like it just sort of like, well, we're just going to tell these stories. But I do think the Tribble story, Lower Decks, shouts to you, and then the Lore War setup story felt like they really popped and were very pointed.
Plastic Man, No More, #1 from DC Comics, written by Christopher Cantwell, art by Alex Lins. This is a Black Label series where Plastic Man gets hit with a heat ray and suddenly starts finding himself literally and figuratively falling apart. They really built this up as like a body horror comic book, and there's a little bit of that. But the thing that I was really drawn to was Cantwell playing with the idea of Plastic Man being treated as a joke by everybody in the Justice League, but him not really saying anything funny at any point. I thought that was really a fascinating dichotomy to play with there.
As a comedian, you're saying.
Yes.
We all are in comedy on this podcast, and so, like, I feel like we're maybe responding to the idea that Plastic Man is literally dying when he shows up at Justice League, and they're all like, Plastic Man, you crazy. And he's like, have my rubber arm in a bag. That's how bad I am right now. So one of many comics that we're going to talk about where being the rubber man is a bummer. In this stack, but this I really did like this. I thought I didn't know what to expect. I forget how much Plastic Man was a criminal when he started, and that was really cool and interesting part here, and showing a family man who then sort of messes up his family. I just liked a lot of the aspects to this.
Yeah, it was a lot for a first issue. I think there's a lot of setup going on here and a lot of stuff they're trying to balance. I think that's really going to hopefully pay off in the second issue when it starts to come together. But yeah, Alex Lids also draws some pretty gross stuff with Plastic Man dripping all over the place, so that's fun as well. He dripping, straight dripping. Minor Arcana, #1 from Boom Studios, written and drawn by Jeff Lemire. The big deal here is this is Jeff Lemire's first ongoing series that he's written and drawn himself since Sweet Tooth, so that's a big deal. But the actual idea of the book is you have a woman named Teresa who moves back to her hometown because her mother is not doing too well. Her mother is the town psychic who everybody loves. She hates psychics, doesn't believe in them. You can kind of see where this is going.
Yeah, and I guess we aren't going to quote-unquote spoil that.
There's magic. She gets sucked into a magic world.
And so this is very much in line with all of that. I mean, this flex that this is the first ongoing for Jeff Lemire, like when Fish Flies just ended, which was a limited series, but that was fantastic. So I think Jeff Lemire's just been on a real run, and this is just the next place to go for him.
The thing that I really liked about this, this is like him playing the hits, is nobody does small towns like Jeff Lemire. Like, he fleshes out the small town with a lot of interesting characters that feel very real. Our main character is very run down and angry the entire issue. This, though, my one hesitation, which is my same hesitation with a lot of Jeff Lemire stuff, is this feels like the first 30 to 40 pages of a graphic novel, and I don't quite know what we're getting into yet. I'll 100% read the second issue. Love Jeff Lemire, but that was holding me back a little bit because we get to the end and I'm like, okay, I don't know what this means.
Yeah, it's a lot of establishment, but not a lot of drama. And it doesn't help that the character is sort of like mad the whole time.
Yeah.
So
she's so mad.
She's very mad. And like, maybe
do you think maybe she should smile a little bit more? Is that what you're getting at?
That's
Justin?
Not what I'm saying. That's
oh, really?
Okay,
saying. Good. Okay.
But what I am saying is like, when a character's introduced into a magical world, especially if we're going to want to ride with them, I want them to be at least like, whoa. And it doesn't, the tone, is really floating in that particular space of like negativity. So, but I'm assuming we're going to get to a place. I'm speaking to your note that this feels like the beginning. It says big beginning energy, but Jeff Lemire's amazing, so I'm excited to be along for the ride.
The Ultimates #4 from Marvel, written by Dennis Camp, art by Phil Noto. This is keep going on the hype train. This is an issue that Dennis Camp has been hyping up a lot online. As soon as they announced Robert Downey Jr. as Doom, he was like, if you want to understand how Robert Downey Jr. could be Doom, read The Ultimates #4. Well, I've read The Ultimates #4. I don't know what he was talking about, but
I bet I have a guess.
Yeah, you have a guess. Do you want to do it now or at the?
Yeah, no. So this, if Robert Downey Jr. is playing, we're assuming there's an Iron Man aspect. There's a Tony Stark nature to Iron Man, to Robert Downey Jr. Entering the Marvel universe and playing Doom. And this story is a unbelievable, fantastic story about how Reed Richards could become his opposite, Doctor Doom. And we see that progression both in present and sort of moving from a past point forward, sort of told all at the same time. And I thought it was amazing. Dennis Camp, I think, has made a lot of books, and he's been sort of working on Marvel stuff. And it's not like hitting crazy hard. I like a lot of what he's done. This is the issue to sort of set him up as like a Jonathan Hickman-esque talent in the Marvel stable, bringing us just a fantastic story where you break down. It's very upsetting to see Reed Richards, see how easy it would have been for a character as a hero such as Reed Richards to become a villain.
It's interesting you call out Jonathan Hickman because this is the most Hickman-esque issue of this title so far, and maybe the most Hickman-esque thing that Dennis Camp has written. And it's not just because he's playing with the Maker and he's playing with the Fantastic Four, but I do think there's that sense of delving into Reed and Doom and their relationship that came in a lot of Hickman's Fantastic Four run, running into Secret Wars. That's very much at play here. The thing that I missed a little bit in this issue, though I think it's okay, is I've been bowled over by how this is the reverse of the old Ultimates. I think I talked about this with the last issue, but how instead of being like the conquering heroes, the authority, but in the Marvel Universe, this is the people who are supporting the disenfranchised, the more minority groups who are battened down by the government. And I love that in the first couple of issues here. This one is a pure structure play, and I love that. It is 4 panels on every single page. The top panel walks us through initially the Fantastic Four origin, The second panel right under that is how it started to go wrong, or how it went wrong in the aftermath.
Or went differently.
Yeah. The third panel, which I think is the boldest one of all, is Doom, our Reed Richards who's become Doom, watching that and experiencing that again. And then the fourth panel is after that, him trying to fix his mistakes, which is a very classic Reed Richards thing to do. So it's just this pure mastery of the comic book form playing throughout the issue. Phil Noto's art, of course, is incredible, and he captures so many things. There's a very upsetting panel of the Maker experimenting on this version of Reed.
It was so upsetting.
It's great. But, man, it's just like there's a level of control at play here that's just very impressive.
Yeah, I think Dennis Camp's a real structure guy, and this, to having such a rigid structure, I think really lets it pop. The way that his obsession, the Reed Richards Doom's obsession with replicating the Fantastic Four, trying to someone who's lost their thing, trying to recapture it in a time when it's just when he's in a much darker place, that it just really resonates. This is definitely top of the week. There are a couple comics in this stack that I was so hype about, and this was one of them.
Absolute Power, number 3 from DC Comics, written by Mark Waid, art by Dan Mora. Last issue, the heroes kind of lost and ran away from Fortress of Solitude. Now they've retreated to Themyscira, and things go wrong again, I'm sorry to say, for our heroes before they start to go a little bit right, and they go back on the offensive here by the end of the issue. You were pretty excited about this one, Justin, so take it away.
Well, as I was saying, this is the other comic that I'm so hype on for this week. And these are major events in Marvel and DC. To have them really crushing is really exciting. I feel like it hasn't been this way in a while, where I've been excited about big events on both sides of that, fence. We could call it a fence, but it doesn't really matter.
Sure.
This is the way that Mark Waid's been handling this has just been, I don't know what it is. He's just making all of the notes shine. Like we know the heroes are going to be down. We know they're going to fight and come back. That's the way all of these stories work, sort of at their core. But whatever it is, he's such a pro. It is working on me so hard. I cried in this comic.
Wow.
When Superman is hugging his son, I was legitimately crying, and it came upon me like I'm in the middle. I'm trying to cook dinner for my kids, reading this, and I'm like, "What? Am I crying? Am I crying?" Like it snuck up on me so hard, and that's hard. That's very hard to do. So, shouts to that. There's just a great panel in here that does it, and I just think the sort of orchestra of these events is very hard to pull off. The orchestration, and Mark Waid is doing it. All the instruments are in play. It's working so hard. I love Amazos. You gotta love Amazos.
Yeah.
It's great. Were you crying at this?
I was not crying at this, but I do really appreciate the thing that we keep talking about with Absolute Power, how well coordinated this was, is this event. Mark Waid talked about it a little bit beforehand, where he was like, yeah, we want to make sure that the story in Absolute Power Origins and Absolute Power Task Force 7 and all the tie-ins really dovetails with this. And I remember hearing that and being like, yeah, right. I've heard that. I've heard that before.
Sure.
And
you mean buy all of them? You psychos?
And it does. It absolutely does. All of these things are working in perfect harmony together. This really is maybe one of the best coordinated events I've ever read in all of my time reading comics. It's very impressive because there's stuff that pays off here. There's little bits like we've seen these Amazos have little quirks that leads to an event in this issue that lets the heroes get ever so slightly ahead so that they can eke out maybe not a win, but literally being one step ahead for the first time in this entire event. It's just great. It's really well done.
Well, and it extends back to even a lot of the lead up to Absolute Power. I feel like if you're going to criticize so many modern events, it's like, man, there's so many ancillary titles. None of it quite fits together. What are we doing? Blood Hunt was an example of that on the Marvel side. But for this event, the way that Dreamer was set up, the character Dreamer was set up in the DC universe, and I won't spoil what happens, but the way that their arc worked was amazing. And it really paid off in a way where I was like, I can't believe the patience and sort of calibrated storytelling that allowed that character to come out of nowhere, become medium important, majorly important, and then literally like a sort of fork in the road in this event was beautifully made.
Totally agree. Let's talk about Duck and Cover, #1 from Dark Horse Comics, written by Scott Snyder, art by Raphael Albuquerque. This is actually, like a lot of the Scott Snyder Dark Horse stuff, a collection of things from Comixology. There's the first 2 issues of the title there. And the rough concept is, you've all heard of Duck and Cover, where, or maybe you haven't, but back in the day, I don't know, that was like almost a century ago at this point, when there was a threat of nuclear bombs dropping, they said, hey, hide under your desk, which is the most ridiculous thing of all time. Yeah. What this plays with here, to get into spoilers, is what if that was accurate? And what if that actually did protect you? And where could we go from there? We're focusing on a kid who desperately wants to be a filmmaker and ends up in a nightmare movie he could never really imagine. Plus, you got the team from American Vampire coming back together, and exciting. That's an event in and of itself. This is fun, even with the darkness happening here, even with the real commentary on the 1950s in America. This is still a very fun book.
Agree, and it's bad what's happening. A lot of the story is hard to read about this character. Like it's so like I'm curious. We really make this our protagonist suffer a lot in this to get to a point where his dreams just, I guess, don't come true, but do come true in a weird way. And now we're following maybe the hardest version of a dream coming true is what my takeaway was. So it was a nice roller coaster ride. I just didn't know where we were going for a lot of it, and it felt I was rooting for my guy, and it was hard to watch all of the bad things happen.
I could not imagine reading this as 2 separate issues on Comixology, because the first issue is like 1950s are bad, man.
Yeah. Exactly. It's not good.
What? Oh my God. And then it takes a nice, fun, crazy twist by the end. Excited to read the second issue here. And Raphael Albuquerque, always great on art. He really gets to flex his muscles in this one. So that's fun. Star Wars, The Acolyte, Kelnaka, #1 from Marvel, written by Kevin Scott, art by Marika Cresta. Acolyte got canceled, but you can't keep a good show down.
Book shines on.
It does. This is focusing on the Wookiee Jedi, and that's the only character, I believe, from The Acolyte we see in here.
Yes, but popular.
Popular, sure.
Because he's like Chewbacca, but a Jedi. Have you noticed that?
It was weird to me. And I will say, I like this book. Like, let me say the positive first. I put aside any, like, ooh, this is going to really flesh out what you knew about the Acolyte, because it basically has nothing to do with it other than the fact that we're following Kelnaka, a Wookiee Jedi. It's a good Star Wars comic. Kevin Scott knows how to write a good Star Wars comic. It's all about Jedi and Padawan and learning from each other. There's a good theme there. Marika Cresta draws some good action scenes throughout. So that's very fun. It's weird to me how much time they spent on, like, this Wookiee doesn't talk.
Yeah,
when,
I agree.
Like, famously, Wookiee are constantly like, and everybody's like, I know, shut up.
Well, but it's funny, is the point, like, not only does he not talk, he doesn't do the yelling that some people can see and understand as a language. He doesn't say shit.
Yeah.
He doesn't say anything.
I don't know. I didn't get it. Maybe, granted, I mostly watch the movies. Maybe this is a whole thing on the animated series or something like that, where they're like, Wookiee are mostly silent. Chewbacca's the loud one.
I don't think so. I think Kelnaka is meant to be sort of like a monk. Kelnaka has like that sort of status, and that feels like that's what this issue is sort of trading on. And I think it does, like you're saying, it does a good job of it. And, you know, this is a character that feels like popped just because of the very obvious, the premise of, like, what if Chewbacca was a Jedi, a Wookiee was a Jedi? And so, like, the fact that this story did a great job of actually fleshing out that character and giving some meaning to Kilnaka's version of being a Jedi Knight, I thought was really cool. And I enjoyed the issue just in general. Even if you're not an Acolyte person, I think if you're like Star Wars, this is worth a read.
If anything at this point, and this is nothing against fans of the Acolyte, I feel like this labeling is hindering it. I keep seeing it on Dark Horse's books as well, where they're like 100 years before the Acolyte. And I kind of feel like maybe take it off the cover. Maybe take that off there because I don't know, man. Anyway, bummer, but good comic book. Poison Ivy, number 25 from DC Comics, written by G. Willow Wilson, Joanne Starer, Grace Ellis, Gretchen Felker Martin, and Dan Waters. Art by Mircea Takara, Haining, Biren Level, Adagon Ilhan, and Danny. We are celebrating, per the number, 25 issues of Poison Ivy. We have a wraparound story from the regular writing and art team. And meanwhile, the supporting characters all go off in different directions and do stuff. This title is always great. I love the G. Willow Wilson and Mircea Takara stuff. That is always good to read. I was also really into the Dan Waters story that shows a eco-terrorist who is in love with Poison Ivy. I thought that was very cool. But I did want to give a shout out. I should have written down his name, but Hassan, I'm forgetting his last name, who does the letters. I was really struck in this issue by like, that's the through line. That's the thing that's like connecting all these things.
That's a great call.
The very bold lettering in this title has been so consistent and so interesting, and it really binds together all these short stories.
I agree. I liked that this made me feel like, is this comic ending? I guess this is what we've talked about a lot. And it's not. No, I know. But like it had that ender. I didn't know if we were going to get a surprise like, we're out later at the end of this issue. But it was really, really great. And it felt like the fact that this Poison Ivy series, which felt like a limited series when it first started, has now enough like heat and momentum that it can do an issue like this, where it is like a series of stories with different creators that all bind together the characters. It's very well done. I love this supporting cast. The fact that the status quo is you've got Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, Solomon Grundy hanging around. I forget her name, Linda from HR.
Yeah, it's not Linda, but
it's not Linda, but I know it's something like that. Hanging out together, and they are the cast, is for a Poison Ivy book is wild. And one of these stories is literally just like a tragic, horror anthology story following two characters as they become victims of the Lamia spores. Like it was great. I just love that the format's a little different here, and it's really working.
Totally agree. Next up, The Autumn Kingdom, number 1 from Odie Press, written by Cullen Bunn, art by Christopher Mitten. This is a new dark fantasy series about a family. The father is a best-selling fantasy writer. He takes his family to a remote region of Norway so he can write his new book. And it seems like things from his book might be becoming real, as by the end they start to attack his family. What'd you think about this one, Justin?
This was interesting. Again, another like format book where we go from something, we're thrust into a world that is a fantasy world, and then we hit the real world in a way I was like, oh, I like this. It felt like a deep mythology book that suddenly I was like, I don't know what's happening at first, but then I liked the rhythm here, and we're left with a lot of mysteries about what's happening, but the front half of the book really got me on board.
Nothing against Cullen Bunn, because I love Bunn.
You love buns.
Yeah. Christopher Mitten's art is the real standout here. He gets to show off a lot of really cool fantasy, forest, woodsy type things, per the name The Autumn Kingdom and everything. So I really like the look of the book and the look of the characters and the creatures that we get to see throughout, the dilapidated statues and everything. I thought that was very neat. So good-looking book, intriguing mythology to start. Next up, Marvel Zombies, Dawn of Decay, number 1 from Marvel, written by Thomas Krajewski, art by Jason Murr. This is such an interesting book that I was not expecting what we're getting here, because this is not Marvel Zombies the way we know Marvel Zombies.
No. And I was like, what? It felt like such a strange. I don't know I don't know what about this.
Yeah, I don't know what this shouldn't. Here's what happens in this issue. So Groot has a cold. This is very much, if not exactly the MCU, it's very MCU adjacent. It's like the next universe over or something like that in comic book form, because you have all those characters there. They have their looks from the movies, etc. And Groot sneezes on Captain America and, per Poison Ivy, gives him a plant zombie virus, and that spreads throughout the world. The ultimate concept, which we don't get this until the final page, but this is the concept of the book that they've already talked about, is Hulk and Groot are the only people who are immune, and they need to get across town to create a cure. So that's the general idea of the thing. The thing that was holding me up that I was thinking about is exactly what we were just talking about, is like, I don't know how fair this is to the book, but the fact that it doesn't match Marvel Zombies at all was bringing me to a screeching halt every couple of pages.
I agree, and I was sort of like, why wouldn't it just do that? Like, I thought it was going to be a sort of a first-person perspective of Groot and Rocket as they encounter Marvel Zombies. And it took and I was excited about that. I was like, oh, great, they're screwing around. It's sort of a comedy version of Marvel Zombies. I don't remember them being in the original series, so, like, of course, it would make sense that we would find them anew here since they've become so popular. But it was odd, and it's also strange that this is becoming, like, a sort of, like, can we accomplish this little mission while everyone's turned into a plant kind of a thing?
Yeah, it's particularly on the heels of Poison Ivy. It's weird to be like, hey, did somebody read that, hear that there's an animated Marvel Zombies series, and decide to jam the two things together? I just, the point shouldn't matter, mind you. Like, if it's a good comic, it's a good comic. But that's, from my perspective, I would just spend too much time trying to be like, where did this come from and why?
Well, and even beyond that, it's like, especially in light of the Marvel Zombies series, like, shouldn't you want to do one over there?
Yeah.
The fun thing you're doing over there? Your cartoon
Right.
stuff? Do some zombie stuff.
Yeah.
And instead, they're clearly not Marvel Zombies. This should be called not Marvel Zombies, because
Right.
they're not. That's not at all what they are.
No, it's not that at all. That said, this is potentially, I think, like a little more all ages friendly take on Marvel Zombies. So maybe the goal is the eventual trade collection, which you can release as a digest in stores or something like that, and be like, oh yeah, these are MCU characters fighting plant zombies, ... But
Yeah.
I don't know. It was fine. Just obviously we're being comic book nerds about it.
Well, and I don't even, because I agree with you. Like, it was a fine story, and it's very fun. It feels like it was maybe like, oh, this pitch is fun. Let's do this fun and funny pitch. And it wasn't as obsessed with the business side of things, something we wish comic book companies were doing all the time. So why are we being dicks? I ask you, Alex.
I don't know. I can't even answer. I think that's the way we were born.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
I was born with a dick in my mouth, I always like to say.
That is what the doctor said.
Unfortunately. I have some follow-up questions. The Penguin at number 12 from DC Comics, written by Tom King, art by Rafael De La Torre. This is a belated end to the series about the Penguin crawling his way up the crime ladder. I don't know. He's becoming the crime boss of Gotham again.
Clearly, Alex is involved in some crimes. He knows about the crime ladder.
Maybe it is because this is coming so late, but this very much felt like a coda to me. There's a sort of inevitability of like, well, of course, this stuff that is going to happen is just going to kind of happen. But I liked it, and I like... It's pretty clear Tom King teased this up for something else afterwards. It feels like he's stealthily doing this Batman trilogy between Killing Time, which was super fun and people should check out, this, which includes some of the same characters and ideas, and he's teeing up a third one. So I like that a lot. Good comic.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny. I feel like The Help is a character that Tom King clearly loves. He gets a lot of play in this issue, and I think it's cool. I like him too. But it also feels like, reading this issue, I was like, what is the takeaway of this series? Because you walk out of it, and it's sort of like something that this series did irreverently was sort of say, like, maybe the Penguin's not so bad, and maybe Batman's not so good. And I really think that's where we're left here. This is a series that feels like it's saying, what's the big difference, really?
Well, I think there's a little bit of that. That's certainly, I don't know, that is a troubling thing to throw out there, the retcon that Batman and Penguin have been working together this entire time. That came a couple of issues back, and really reading this issue in particular, it's like, I don't know, have you tarnished Batman for good? I'm not quite sure. Is that something we should be doing? It's fine. It happened. It's good.
I think this book does tarnish Batman. And like, you see them, there's a point in this story where they are like, well, we're going to die together. Us people dying together. And I was like, oh man, what a bummer way to go.
Well, I think the ultimate takeaway, and I believe somebody all but says this, is it's just writing about perspectives. Like, it's not even about who is the hero of their own story, because I don't think anybody is a hero here. It's more who is the central character of their story. And Penguin is like, yeah, I'm the central character of my story. I'm the Penguin. Batman is the side character who thinks he knows me, but he has literally no idea. And sometimes we flip over to Batman's perspective, and Batman's like, Penguin thinks he has control of this story, but he doesn't because I'm Batman. But we also get to see everybody. We get to see the Help. We get to see the cursing FBI agent. All of them are living their own stories and their own ways. And are they able to see other people's perspectives? I think what maybe Tom King is positing here is the Penguin is a great villain because he is able to see all those perspectives and he's able to play them against each other.
Yes. And I mean, and then on the other side of it, though, there's this really tragic interplay between the Penguin kills a guy's son, and then something happens in the middle of this issue that was one of the most ice cold situations I've read in a comic in a long time, from everyone's perspective. And it just felt like this book was about being like evening the playing field on heroes, villains, and everyone in between, being like, everyone's just trying to get their job done for the day. And I was like, wow, what a dark takeaway. The real hero is the Help, because he's like, I'm a badass and I'm just doing my job, and fuck you all. And it feels like he's the only one that remains pure in this story, I believe.
Yeah. I think the takeaway is do your fucking job. Stop complaining.
What a great thing. What a great thing to hear from your relaxing media that you take in.
Well, if you don't want to do your job, maybe be a bird, I always say, with Rook Exodus #5 from Image Comics, written by Jeff Johns, art by Jason Fabouk. Our main character has been very much refusing the call to be the master of all birds on his planet, despite having a helmet that allows him to control birds. And in this issue, he goes on a little bit of a dream quest to find his true power. Does he find it? I'll let you read the issue to find out.
Wow, nice. I mean, I think the art in this is really good. It has a nice, and it matches the tone of the story, sort of 90s image, a modernized 90s image vibe, both in the writing and the art. So that matches nicely. But this story, for whatever reason, feels just a little out of step with, I don't know what. There's something about it that I'm just like, I don't know what's up. Maybe it is the hero refusing to just do some good stuff, answer the call. It's funny to talk about this on the heels of the Penguin book, because it feels a little bit like, yeah, maybe he's not good. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here?
I really like the art as well. And I do like Jeff Johns is clearly having fun with this. There's some very funny moments where like a giant hog named Pumbaa is talking to our main character. But I agree with you. I think the problem is the basic idea of he got hired to put on a bird controlling helmet, and seemingly when we start has been controlling birds for years. And now we're at a place where he's like, I'd never control birds, ever. I don't know how to do it. I'm entirely unaware. And I'm like, what were you doing before with the bird controlling helmet then? What happened previous to this? So
Yeah, like, why aren't you doing your job, bird mind? You should be listen to the helm. Do your job.
100%.
And I do think that is definitely an inherent part of this and a lack of confidence in this character. And so maybe it is a journey about like him, like sort of getting his bird controlling mojo, like a lot of us, under control. It's just, I was like, isn't the helmet doing a lot of the work, my man? But I guess not.
There we go. Master of all animals. Let's move on. Talk about Firefly. Malcolm Reynolds, year one from number one from Boom Studios, written by Sam Humphries, art by Giovanni Fabiano. Per the name, this is a origin story from Malcolm Reynolds and how he came to be a brown coat. It's not in the way you'd expect, or not in the way I'd expect. What'd you think about this one, Justin?
Yeah, it has a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the right reference, like a military farce at the end for a character that I was just thinking the other day, I want to rewatch Serenity. That movie is excellent. And I haven't rewatched Firefly in a long time, but Serenity is something I like to just check in with because I do love the way the characters are laid out in that movie. And so I was excited to read this, and I'm excited that they're pursuing a year one idea here because that's interesting. It's just tonally, a lot of the stuff in the military feels like it's playing out like Beetle Bailey or F Troop. I'm like, what? They're all being sort of goofy. And I expected it to be a little bit more Western-y and sort of like, yeah, quippy, sure, but the action would still remain dramatic and sort of high stakes.
Yeah, the part of the problem is I haven't read a ton of the Firefly books, so it's possible they've filled in a lot more backstory than I'm aware of. But to your point, there are things like Zoe is much older and Mal shows up as a kid, and I don't know, there's a different dynamic there that I'm used to that doesn't really develop in the way that I expect over the course of the issue. I like Sam Humphries. There's some fun to be had here, but this is not the sort of thing I'm like, that answers that question so much as maybe raises a couple more.
Yeah, I agree.
Venom War. Excuse me. I have a little venom in my throat. Venom War number 2 from Marvel, written by Al Ewing, art by Iban Coelho. When we last left our Venom War, after a ton of exposition, we finally got down to it. We got Eddie Brock on one side, Dylan Brock on the other. They both want the Venom suit, except Peter Parker actually has it, and that's where we ostensibly pick up here with Peter being like, hey guys, let's try to all figure this out together, with the symbiote sort of standing by the side. Except, and here's my issue with the comic, love that stuff. That character dynamic is very fun. It's in a literal wrestling ring. My problem is we open up with another variant of Eddie Brock, who is with some sort of variant of Cletus Cassidy, and they're releasing zombiotes onto the city through Alchemex, and there's more symbiotes. And I was like, we did half to 3/4 of an issue of getting caught up of like, okay, here's the entire history of Venom. You need to know to see why this father is fighting their son for clothes.
Yeah.
Move on. Stop adding details. That's enough. That's all I want to see.
You know what? I was like, wait, who's this evil Eddie Brock? Because there's another Eddie Brock who just has a fun facial hair and he's having a whole fight in a wrestling ring. But I will say, I did like the action that the evil Eddie Brock and the maybe just Carnage suit, just the symbiote of Carnage are doing. So, like, I'm like, I hear you. It is a lot going on. And again, it's a tonal mismatch of like super dark murder zombie stuff and sort of like, hey, we're here having a fun wrestling situation. Come hang out. So, like, I don't know.
The one thing I had a good time reading the issue, even though I'm not the biggest symbiote fan. It's a lot of a nonstop ridiculousness, particularly with like Eddie starts taking all of his personalities and be like, jam into this one suit. And then Dylan does the same thing and makes like a mecha symbiote suit. So Al Ewing is clearly having a lot of fun here, and that's fine. But I do think the idea that they bring up of, hey, a lot of time has passed since the first time Peter Parker wore this suit. Maybe he's best suited for that? And I was like, yes,
I
probably.
Agree. Like, the Peter Parker stuff and hearing that from the Venom symbiote's perspective, because we get that narration here, I really like that, and that's cool. I want more of that.
Yeah.
Put him back in the suit. Don't
back
learn
in the
a
back
lesson,
of black. Yeah, learn no lessons. Batman 152 from DC Comics, written by Chip Zdarsky and Kelly Thompson, art by Mike Hawthorne and Mattia de Luis. The front story here is a Absolute Power tie-in, picking up from the last issue as Cat and Bat are on Zarnia, Lobo's homeworld, and fighting the Suicide Squad to get a mother box.
Chronicles of Zarnia.
Ah, there we go. C.S. Lewis, just as he intended. And they're trying to get a mother box back from Amanda Waller, which ties into Absolute Power that we talked about earlier. And in the backup story, it's basically straight up a Birds of Prey story, but by the team from The Cull, which is one of the best books of the past 2 years. So that was pretty cool.
It was really cool. I loved the backup. The art was beautiful. I thought that was just a great backup. But I also like the front story. Like, I think this did a nice epilogue, Bat and Cat epilogue, while still being an Absolute Power tie-in in a good way. And that's hard. I was surprised they were able to sort of keep the vibe of them from the Tom King run in the midst of this just shootout mother box story.
This is getting into a almost non-spoiler here. Were you annoyed that they didn't kiss at the end?
Oh, because they're kissing on the cover?
Well, they're kissing on the cover, but also the whole thing at the end, they have a whole conversation. They end up on the beach the last time they were happy before they found out that Alfred was killed by Bane and Batman blamed himself. And Catwoman is like, just do what you want. What do you want to do right now? What do you really want to do? And Batman's like, you know what? And then you flip the page and they're just walking off into the sunset. I was like, what? No.
Yeah, but I also think, like, they are not going to pursue more of this story.
Sure.
So, like, I think they're like, a lot of people are like, if they kiss, that means they're in love. You know? Because that's what happens. When you see someone kiss, you're like, they're in love. No notes, they're going to get married. So
yeah, every time. I saw my teachers kissing. And I don't know where I was going with that.
Just have a couple follow-ups on that. Are you talking about current teachers? Are you talking about past teachers kissing?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I ran out of steam there.
You
The
mean your
Holy
parents?
Roller, my parents, the original teachers, the OGs.
Yep.
The Holy Roller, number 8 from Image Comics, written by Rec Remender, Andy Samberg, and Joe Troman. Art by Roland Bosky. Our bowling ball Avenger was captured in the last issue, and that plays out here as he fights back against the fascist forces that are threatening to take over his hometown and then the United States. This book is very silly.
There's not a lot of bowling, I will say, in this issue. Very little bowling. We have our Holy Roller going up against basically Robert Redford, which I thought was strange. And it's just crazy how much a story about a bowling superhero, sort of like a comedy premise, is now about a Hitler app that is being, to the owner of a Hitler app fighting with Hitler popping up being like, I'm here too, every now and again, fighting a bowling superhero when there's no bowling ball present.
I agree that's a little bit of a problem. Maybe they felt it was a limited premise to begin with. I don't know, potentially. Whatever it is.
Have you been bowling? There's a lot of options.
Never. I have never been bowling. Is it fun?
Yeah, it's fun. It's like ice skating for a ball, a very heavy ball.
Oh, I can definitely imagine what that's like.
You help out with that.
Yeah. I also help out with skating. So there you go. Same sort of thing. Nice. Great. Good review. Animal Pound number 5 for Boom Studios. Should I tell us when we do good reviews? Animal Pound number 5.
I love any feedback. I just
Boom Studios, written by, once again, Tom King. Art by Peter Gross. Is the final issue of this series, which focuses, it's a modern recontextualization of Animal Farm. So at the pound of the title, we very blatantly, this was not too explicit, and then it became very explicit. The main dog character who's taken over the pound is very explicitly a stand-in for Donald Trump. And this issue opens up on the credit page with a little disclaimer about this being written before the events of July 13th, 2024, and anything similar to real events is purely coincidental. Yeah. And I read that, and it legitimately took me like 2 to 3 minutes to be like, what happened on July? Go back in time. And then eventually I did realize what it was, but
I went on a roller coaster. Interesting.
Yeah,
that
what did I do? That was right after July 4th. Was I still eating hot dogs? Potentially. I don't know.
Yeah. Agreed. That was something. And also in the story, that of course perked up my ears to be like, oh, how is this going to relate to the Donald Trump assassination attempt? And it very, very lightly does. It's a much smaller aspect. Reading that note, I was like, oh, surely.
No, but there's, just to tell you explicitly what it is, there is a point when the main Piggy character, the dog, is attacked by a cat while he's walking through a hallway and gets a scratch on his nose. So I assume they read that and they were like, let's be uber safe. This is a Donald Trump stand-in who is getting an assassination attempt and gets one of his extremities on his face scratched a little bit. But I cannot imagine anybody reading that and being like, how dare you?
Well, I mean, honestly, though, it is a little too close to what actually happened.
Sure.
In reality, in a way where I'm like, oh, it's not fucked up that they are telling a story about an assassination attempt on a Donald Trump-like character. It's more, oh, an assassination attempt happened and he just got a little scratch. Oh, okay. That does feel almost prescient and very predicted, very well predicted.
This book was fantastic. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it at the beginning, but I think it's panned out really nicely to be very much of our political era and saying a lot about all sides. Like, we're talking about the Donald Trump stand-in, but there's also a lot about liberal malaise that I think plays in there in terms of, we can't do anything about that, and where that will end up for everybody as well. So smartly done. I thought it's a very political book. It's hard to do a political book like this from a major publisher, so kudos to them on that.
Definitely, and I think the way that this book dances between the original Animal Farm story and then a real, very pointed look at modern politics, I thought was well done, because Animal Farm was about communism. And that's not what we're struggling with in our current political situation.
Speak for yourself, but
from my perspective,
yeah.
I'll qualify all of my statements. And so, like, the fact that they were able to tell that they were able to tell that story using a lot of the same elements and make it land on both fronts, and I do think it really landed the Animal Farm adaptation at the end of it as well, in a way that I thought was like, how are they going to land the plane the same way the Animal Farm did? And they did it. So I really love this book. I think this is a great read. It you'll know what they're satirizing. We've already said it, but as you're reading it, you feel it in a way that is, it's pointed.
Daredevil number 13 from Marvel, written by Saladin Ahmed, art by Chris Campagna. Picking up of the cliffhanger of the last issue, Kingpin wants forgiveness from Matt Murdock, and he can't give it to him, and that's what we're wrestling with here. I still don't quite get this book, to be honest with you.
Yes, and like, it's all the themes are there on the table, where it's like that Matt Murdock struggles religion, guilt. The stuff that's surprising here is our guy Thick Wilson, formerly known as the Kingpin, is here, and like, he's crying and upset because he just had a demon inside of him. And it's so much of a focus that Matt's like, yeah, it's crazy he's upset. And Elektra's like, yeah, it's crazy he's so upset. He's still praying. Matt's like, it is so crazy how crazy he's upset he is. And I was like, okay, what are we doing here? And so, like, it's just a little disjointed what's happening. Because I do like the ideas. They're contextualizing Matt Murdock's faith in a very direct way by having him in conflict with demons that are after him, representing sins, something he's always struggling with. And so it's just not quite connecting. But the stuff that I love about it is Elektra. Elektra has become such a great player in the Daredevil universe. I want to focus on that.
Yeah, I will, not to call out one specific panel, but generally the art's good in this issue. I like the depiction of Matt. Particularly, I think the scenes with the kids who are trying to figure out what's going on with the demons that are attacking them, etc., are very well done. But there's a scene at the end of the issue, this is a spoiler here, but at the end of the issue, Matt Murdock, what I eventually figured out, makes the decision to be like, I can't be a priest anymore, and burns his priest outfit. But as far as I could tell, they don't establish his priest outfit before that. He pulls out a matchbook, and then he throws it down, and it's so hard to see the priest outfit. I turned to that page and I was like, did he just set his feet on fire? What is happening?
It did look weird. Honestly, I at first thought he was burning Hell's Kitchen. I was like, yo, don't do that. That's a little bit of a reach, guy.
Which was weird. I don't know. The action should be clearer than that, particularly for a cliffhanger, but it is what it is. Yeah. Birds of Prey, number 13 from DC Comics, written by Kelly Thompson, art by Gavin Greedry. This is the final issue of this arc, as the birds are escaping a villain through various portals. They come up with a plan to get her into the real world, and it works in spectacular fashion. Every issue of this book is so creative and fun just to look at. Like, I know all shouts out to Kelly Thompson, but the art in every issue is great. There's this villain just keeps turning into a longer and longer snake thing that coils around everybody. And it's so much fun and so enjoyable. Great visuals.
Agree. The art's fantastic. I really like this story as well, where it was just like, they're like, how are we going to get home? And then there's a ton of deviations on that, and they're falling into increasingly different and interesting realities. And then they're like, just get us in the portal. Like, the writing in this is just so down to earth in a way that really is working for this story. And I want to keep reading this. I hope we don't lose this team going forward.
Yeah, I agree. The Infernals, number 5 from Image Comics, written by Noah Gardner and Ryan Parrott, art by John J. Pearson and Lola Bonato. This is the final issue of the series that is, well, started as Succession, but with Hell, but there's a bunch of twists along the way as people make their final moves here. I really liked where this ended up. Given the straightforward premise and the twists and turns throughout, I think they ended in a really interesting place for these characters, and great art throughout.
Yeah, this was fun. This is your guy, Ryan Parrott, from Rogue Sun.
Yeah, it is. Polly want more of his comics, I always say.
You love him.
I do.
But yeah, this is fun. I like a story that really gives us a lot of time with the epilogue. I think is nice, and we get to really see where all the characters end up as they face the aftermath of a classic Antichrist situation.
Uncanny Valley, number 5 from Boom Studios, written by Tony Fleeks, art by Dave Wachter. In this issue, our main character, who is part cartoon, has been discovered by the big villain who wants to do something to him, basically take his power and ingest it, probably. And he and his allies are all fighting back against that. Basically, everything this character has learned since the beginning of the series has started to pay off here. I really love how this is coming together, and every single issue, particularly this issue, really reminds me of that one squeaky shoe from Roger Rabbit.
Oh, man, the dream.
Yeah.
Finally, you're seeing the full story of the squeaky shoe. I mean, that we've loved this comic from the start. The way just the art is able to reflect the writing, I think, is really amazing. And the different worlds that we're playing with, and I thought the sort of twist or the climax of this issue is really well and emotionally played. I want to be part cartoon.
What would you do first? Would you run through a tunnel?
Hand. I would blow up my hand like this.
Oh, blow up your hand like that? Okay.
And then it would be a big hand.
Oh,
and then
man.
I would swing it around or punch something.
Now, for me, I'd be in a restaurant. I'd see a sexy lady, and like my heart would be like boom, 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 and my tongue would roll out and go on the table, and then I'd try to get it back in.
I've seen you in a restaurant before. You're basically doing that.
Yeah, but that's like for a steak or something. I'm talking about as a cartoon, it would be for a sexy lady rather than food.
Yeah, exactly. Cartoon.
I just once, other than my beautiful wife, would love to see a sexy lady. I don't know.
That's a rare case where someone qualifies something. I was like, oh, that was even weirder when you qualified that. You qualified that in an even weirder direction.
Get Fury, #5 for Marvel, written by Garth Ennis, art by Jason Burrows. In this issue, the Punisher gets Fury. He gets him. He's been after him the entire time, and he finally gets him out of the Hanoi Hotel. Hope I pronounced that correctly. This is a Vietnam-era book with Frank Castle and Nick Fury. They're together now, and Nick Fury has been really broken by his experiences. Not doing well at all. I'll tell you what, this continues to be Garth Ennis just being the best war comics writer around, but I am really looking forward to next issue because that seems like that's going to be the bloody, violent, all-out brawl end to this thing, and it's going to get so gross.
Yeah, I mean, this comic has especially set up a great pair of villains who you want to die so hard. And I'm not that guy. Like, I imagine Pete, if he were here, would be like, those guys need to die immediately. And I would have to agree with him. They've been set up so well as shitty people and bad villains that we're going to get there. And we're going to get to see Fury go from a true catatonic mess, where we find him in this issue, to someone who's going to get some righteous vengeance. And I'm excited for that. But I do think, like a lot of books, something fucked up is going to happen that we won't predict.
Yeah. I would throw out there, here's my prediction for the final issue. So we are getting a forward in time or current in time narration from the guy who was the jailer at the Hanoi Hotel, I believe, sort of like telling the story of this. I bet he's telling the story to either the Punisher or Nick Fury or both of them, and they will will probably kill him at the end of the series. Yeah.
Okay.
Good stuff, though. Next up, Justice Society of America, #11 from DC Comics, written by Jeff Johns, art by Marco Santucci. Big, huge issue here. The last issue of this book?
It's not.
It's not. There's one more. There's one more after this.
Graduation Day is the 7th.
Yes, there's one more, and then they are switching over to the all-in Jeff Lemire run on JSA. But yeah, this really ties up a lot of the threads here in terms of Huntress, and we get enormous fights with the JSA and the Legion of Superheroes. Yeah. So the real standout to me in this issue, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it feels like Jeff Johns probably had another 12 issues of story in this book that he was like, I got to do my Ghost Machine stuff. You got to move on to your new JSA title. Let's jam through this.
Fine. Yeah.
But the Marco Santucci, the double page spreads of those fights are killer. They're great.
Well, and like his love for this Huntress character is just so palpable. Like he has entered her into the JSA canon, and she lands in an interesting place here at the end of this issue. Love the use of the Legion in this. We were talking to our buddy Dan Parent of Archie fame, and boy, do we land on an idea they were trying to push out into reality, that Dan Parent needs to draw a Legionnaires or Legion series. So let's make that happen at some point. I don't know who could do that, but please do. I want to also shout out the Starman-centric cover to this comic that haven't seen, drawn by Tony Harris. Love to see my guy on the cover. Shouts to that. Speaking of the art here, when we slip into, there's a reveal of Eclipso in this, and when we slip into the Eclipso side of things, the art takes on this wild purple and blue tone that I thought was just really well done, in a sort of classic nod, but very modernized with the coloring.
Yeah. Cruel Universe #2 from Odie Press, written by Stephanie Phillips, Ben H. Winters, Chris Condon, and Christopher Cantwell. Once again, art by Riley Rosmo, Leo Max, Javier Fernandez, and David Lapham. This is a sci-fi anthology with a horror bent to it. Another fun collection of stories. Standout for me was Riley Rosmo art. I think is just great, and it's a very fun, silly story from Stephanie Phillips at the beginning that plays on the whole Soylent Green thing. Yeah. And the rest of them are good as well. It's all good teams. But yeah, that was a big one for me.
Well, and they were all good in their own way. Really, really fun standalone stuff. It reminded me, or I was reminded of this again, our Dan Parent interview, and he was talking about it's actually much harder to do a 5-page story than it is to do a 22-page story. And I feel like this comic's a great example of that. These are all short horror sci-fi stories that have to just deliver immediately on their premise, and there's not a lot of time to mess around. And I feel like they all use that small amount of space and real estate they have in the comic to great effect.
I agree. Next up, Scarlet, #4 from Image Comics, written by Kelly Thompson, art by Marco Ferrari. Scarlet is finally reunited with her friend Jinx and fighting her way down and up a tower to get a mystical weapon, along with Storm Shadow. I want to say now our G.I. Joe expert is not here, so we can finally talk openly about this, Justin.
Well, honestly, I need him here because when Storm Shadow finds like a special sword, it seems really important.
Yes,
it's the fabled sword of life.
So, okay, I have a question about that, and maybe we have talked about this on the show before. First of all, overall, good comic. Like we mentioned with previous issues, Kelly Thompson writes some great spy stuff. Love the connection between Scarlet and Jinx in this issue. I thought that was really grounded and emotionally done, and it gives real stakes to everything that's going on. My question about the ending here, and this is sort of a perennial comic book question, is I don't know what that sword is. I assume that is something from like episode 17 of G.I. Joe back in the day, and they were like, swords are not something to play with in your home, and that's one to grow on, or whatever they said at the end of the episode. But does it matter if we...
Knowing is half the battle, Alex.
No, okay, I don't know.
About the sword, specifically.
Yeah. I'm G.I. Joe, and that's news to me, right? Is that what they said, I think?
Yeah, he definitely... They really gave a very succinct news report on the Joes fighting Cobra affected the geopolitical situation in 80s America.
Coming up next, the weather with Snake Eyes. The
Snow Job here with a storm report. We've got some real Snow Job referenced in this comic and treated seriously as a person.
Does it matter if we know what the sword is? That's my inherent question.
I mean, you could run that question across all of the Energon titles, where it's like, is it? Because so many of them rely on reveals like that from the beginning of when Void Rivals started, and I don't think you do. You don't need to know it, but I gotta say, it must feel much better too.
All right,
because like I get that, like this can be, maybe this isn't even a thing because it's not. It could be just treated like a regular reveal at the end of any comic where they're like, look at this, it's the 6th Infinity Stone. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, that's cool. That sounds important. And it is for the story, but that's why I feel like it doesn't really matter what it is. The important part to this issue, I thought, was the Scarlet Jinx stuff, which I thought was really well done. I loved the way that their relationship is sort of expressed between the two of them, and the fact that they then have to immediately move on and get back to Joe business.
Yeah.
Snow business.
There's no business like Joe business, but Superman business is pretty good as well. And it's booming, man, with My Adventures with Superman #4 from DC Comics, written by Josie Campbell, art by Pablo M. Collar. We are continuing the story of Superman teaming up with an entirely different type of Amazo, tying into the animated series on Adult Swim and Max. I really love this issue. I know I'm in the tag for this already, but just seeing Amazo and the Kents and Superman and Lois and Jimmy tried to celebrate Christmas together, I thought was very sweet and very funny. The connection that they find with Amazo and Superman, I thought was very cool and different as well. So I like this series. This is maybe my favorite issue of it so far.
I agree. I really like this story. It's a Christmas story as well, which is always nice. The fact that Amazos are playing such a role in the rest of the DC universe and in this issue, I was like, great synergy. They're all fun. They're all just trying to either kill or be nice, and it's great that we get a nice one here. And then with the way that it ended, I thought really, really hit well.
Yep. Next up, Public Domain #8 from Image Comics by Chip Zdarsky. As we've talked about a lot with this book, this is about a new comic book company called Dallas Comics that has gotten the rights to the classic character The Domain, and they want to bring it into the modern era. Meanwhile, the Marvel Comics-esque company, who also owns the rights for The Domain, is trying to do the same thing. So we're following both of those paths. I really love this. This is so inside baseball, but it's interesting inside baseball, and it's giving us real insight in terms of how comics are made, but not forgetting the comedy at the same time. Great stuff.
It's hard. This is a hard comic to, I think, make, where it really is threading a needle of making very esoteric comic book business feel fun and dramatic. The comedy is great, and like it is dramatic. It's just harder to get there when it's sort of like the villain you're revealing is like, I'm also a comic book publisher. So like, okay, tough to have you there. So like it's really well done. I would be curious if we handed the trade of this comic to a new reader, if they'd be like, got it.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like we were talking about with the Storm Shadow sword, it's a similar sort of thing where like the character dynamics is there. It's about a father trying to reconnect with his two sons who are very clear, distinct characters.
Well, and I would argue that this comic does a better job of establishing what's going on than having a character, a Storm Shadow, pull out a sword and be like, Eureka, I found it. This slightly glowing sword.
Yeah. I will also, just before we move on and get to the last comic, give a shout out. There is a true crime podcast joke in this issue that made me laugh out loud. It's very funny.
Nice.
Last but not least, definitely not least, The Boy Wonder #5 from DC Comics by Judy Ba. This is the final issue of this title. It's a Black Label series, but appropriate for all ages. I will say I've handed to my two kids of varying ages, and they love this book. They can't stop talking about it. It focuses in on Damian Wayne, and in this issue, he's fighting his grandfather, Ra's al Ghul, while the rest of the Robins and associates help him in the background. Each issue has been so focused on one relationship with Damian Wayne. Here, a spoiler for the book, but we're getting his relationship with Batman, which is the thing that they've been holding back on. I love this. From the writing to the art to the storytelling, I thought it was really just sweet. Also, by the end, I was very touched by the place that it ends up, particularly in terms of we've had this young kid dressed as Robin who's been telling the story the entire time. The final twist there really got me. This is a fantastic book, and if not the best, I don't want to call it that, like definitely top tier Black Label.
Yes, I agree. And just hyper specific with what it set out to do, tell just a great Robin story, scooping up a ton of Robin continuity, both from the individual characters and from something that happened, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, the Robin Initiative. Was that what it was called? Where sort of a ton of people in Gotham.
We Are Robin.
We Are Robin. That's it.
Yeah.
And to scoop that up into this and make it emotionally resonant, I was like, wow, really unnecessary and well done. And, we've made the comparison between this book and the TV series Samurai Jack a bunch of times, and it does it not only in the art style, but in the tone and the humor, but while also having deep emotional resonance underneath. So, yeah, this is a must pick up, I think. Either the individual issues, which is the last, like Alex said, or the trade.
Yeah, I'd recommend checking out the individual issues if you can, because that's how it's very specifically structured. It'll work in the trade. It'll be great, but that's the way it was meant to be. And there you go. That is it for the stack. If you'd like to support this podcast and all the podcasts we do, patreon.com/comic book club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Facebook and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about comic books. Apple, Spotify, Android, or the app of your choice. To subscribe, listen, and follow the show at Comic Book Live on Twitter /X, Comic Book Club Live on TikTok and Instagram, comicbookclublive.com. For this podcast and many more, until next time, we'll see you at the Comic Book Club.
And knowing that is half the battle.
Back to you for sports.
Storm Shadow just found his fedora of life.